Ice Cream Man is the gnarliest horror movie that they don't want you to see. The critics are actively attempting to bury Ice Cream Man by claiming that it's tasteless, cynically employs generative AI, and makes its viewers feel extremely uncomfortable. They're right, but what they're missing is why these aspects make Ice Cream Man a necessary film, as it presents a threatening and subversive alternative to the boring, milquetoast state of contemporary horror cinema. But isn't Ice Cream Man tasteless? Yes, but that's the point. Critics claim that the film is amoral, thoughtless, and anti-art. This is why they want the film to fail, as it's an affront to the sterilized state of pop culture. Of course, I agree with the critics' assessment here. However, this tastelessness is, in reality, defiance, courageousness, and a complete lack of inhibition. In a word, the movie is confident, and that's why it's making the critical establishment so upset, as confidence is exactly what they lack. Truthfully, the critics' minds were made up on Ice Cream Man long before it even released, as they've always had a hate boner for the film's director, Eli Roth. Throughout his career, the main reason as to why Roth has been so critically reviled and considered tasteless is his hatred of humanity. Unlike his acclaimed contemporaries, Roth's movies rarely, if ever, provide the viewer with any characters to root for. Ice Cream Man is no different. Even in a story about children, Roth somehow manages to write them as so roundly unlikable that they evade audience identification. Roth's abrasive misanthropy enrages the critical establishment, as it prevents them from losing themselves in cinematic fantasy. Instead, it forces them to reckon with their own miserable lives. What these critics are looking for is fantasy, not cinema, or, foregoing fantasy, a way to stroke their egos. Even though Ice Cream Man is cinematic, it's neither pretentious nor an offering of that escape that they're looking for. Whereas critics see it as a slap in the face, the tasteless vision manifests as a perfect vessel for horror fans, especially those who found themselves bored with Hollywood's current offerings. All that's to say that if you're a fan of horror movies, then please don't listen to what the critics have to say. Ice Cream Man is exceedingly enjoyable because of its tastelessness. Unlike most movies, it has the confidence to know exactly what it is and what it wants to do. It knows that by implementing a tasteless approach, it completely removes the artificial, overrated limiter of decency. Ice Cream Man takes full advantage of that fact, boldly plumbing depths that the neutered cinema of today would never dare. What's undeniable about this film is that, as far as gore and kills go, it's got the juice. In fact, Ice Cream Man might just be Eli Roth's most disturbing film yet. Horror fans will find delight in its unhinged insanity, particularly in an escalatingly illogical and disgustingly Lucio Fulci-esque sequence set in an elementary school. This sequence alone is worth the price of admission. It's so demented and irrational that it reaches the realm of the sublime. Quite simply, this limitlessness is a breath of fresh air. It makes Ice Cream Man feel genuinely dangerous, exciting, and unpredictable. It puts into perspective exactly what today's cinema, particularly horror, is lacking. The chaotic, boundless spirit of exploitation movies. The ruthless bullfight of the grindhouse. It's clearly the vision of a singularly fucked up individual, the likes of which doesn't seem to secure funding anymore, as opposed to a corporate committee or hack filmmaker treating horror as a stepping stone to something better. They want to prevent this flagrant display of free will from reminding you what a real horror movie used to feel like.
What is going on here?
But doesn't Ice Cream Man use AI? Yes, but that's the point. Particularly on social media, this is the most discussed criticism of Ice Cream Man, which most commentators consider to be a morally reprehensible decision. Not only is it lazy, they say, but it sets a dangerous precedent, as it revokes jobs from real human artists. Of course, I agree with this criticism, but only insofar as it applies to traditional filmmaking standards. For a traditional movie, the usage of generative AI, especially when it's as rampant as this, should generally be considered a flaw. However, what distinguishes Ice Cream Man is that it isn't aiming to be a traditional movie. Instead, Roth's film loudly and plainly announces its intentions of being an exploitation movie. Nothing more, nothing less. Considering this, it'd be mistaken to view Ice Cream Man through the lens of traditional standards, as it's imperative to engage with art on its own terms. With that in mind, as an exploitation movie, the usage of generative AI is not only expected, but perfectly aligns with its grindhouse ethos. Now, before you leave or type an angry comment, think about that point for a moment. Consider this. What would have happened if the grindhouse filmmakers of the 70s had access to generative AI? The answer is obvious. They definitely would have taken advantage of it. Crucially, herein lies what separates traditional filmmaking from exploitation filmmaking. The grindhouse isn't focused on, or even really interested in, humanity and art. It exists in a different universe than traditional filmmaking, unbound by the general standards of taste, aesthetics, and morality. For the exploitation filmmaker, the method which proves to be the quickest, cheapest, and most effective way to rile up the audience, no matter what it is, will always be utilized. Think about it. Are you seriously going to sit there and claim that Roger Corman, may he rest in peace, wouldn't have used AI in his films? Or even experimented with it? At the end of the day, Ice Cream Man is nothing more than a low-budget independent horror film. So why is it getting slaughtered for its AI usage when more notoriously powerful offenders like Disney get off relatively scot-free? Where is the Disney boycott? We're really supposed to believe that this is the emergency? The dissent against Ice Cream Man happens to perfectly align with the will of the AI overlords anyways. The establishment, through AI, seeks to replace humanity entirely. They'd rather gatekeep it for the massive corporations, which is the eventual inevitability, than spread it as an open source tool for scrappy independent artists. This begs the question, why should an independent filmmaker be punished for employing generative AI in their film? We, the everyday people, are forced to financially support these data centers against our will anyways. So if it could provide a material benefit to us, then shouldn't we take advantage of it in the limited time that we still can? The average person, especially in these corrupt and difficult times, is entitled to as much help as they can possibly get. This is why it's morally permissible, even when the alternative cost isn't necessarily prohibitive, for an independent artist to utilize generative AI. With that established, it's imperative to investigate the actual instances of generative AI in Ice Cream Man in order to determine whether they hold any artistic merit in and of themselves. Although generally requiring a viewer to be discerning in separating what's real from what's AI, one aspect announced its status as AI generated more than any other: the film's Steamboat Willie-esque animations. The titular Ice Cream Man exploits these animations, envisioned in the classical Disney style, as a means of intimidating and brainwashing the children. The ultimate effect is undeniably creepy, regardless of how the effect was achieved. That said, it'd be mistaken to argue that it was necessary to employ AI in order to achieve this effect. Yet, at the same time, the animation being so clearly AI generated doesn't inherently work against the film. The animations exude that uncanny valley, anti-human effect that's currently plaguing AI video production. In a more traditional movie, this animation being obviously AI generated would have worked against it, as it almost certainly would distract the viewer from the story at hand. However, considering the fact that Ice Cream Man is a self-consciously goofy horror movie, that uncanny valley aesthetic is welcomed, as it's extremely successful in getting under the viewer's skin. With that in mind, although it's at best morally permissible, embracing AI perfectly matches the underlying misanthropy and tastelessness of Roth's filmography, and that of grindhouse cinema as a whole. Granted, this isn't necessarily a good or bad development, but it's nonetheless a significant turning point in the history of film. Herein lies why the AI backlash is so vitriolic amongst the elites. They believe that these tools should be reserved for them. It pisses off the establishment when the little guy doesn't ask for their permission. It pisses off the establishment even more when, by utilizing their own means against them, the little guy is able to express himself to his fullest extent.
You guys see that weird ice cream man today?
What do you mean weird? How is he strange?
But isn't Ice Cream Man uncomfortable? Yes, but that's the point. Critics argue that the movie's continual, borderline compulsive abuse of children characters is indefensible. In fact, for a non-insignificant percentage of viewers, the film makes them so uncomfortable that it leaves them questioning as to whether the director is a pedophile. Of course, I understand where this criticism is coming from. Ice Cream Man, as a consequence of its tastelessness, is definitely an uncomfortable watch. That said, while watching the movie, I didn't notice any content regarding minors that crossed the line. I think people are reading into things a little too much. To my surprise, it wasn't until after the film in which I read the reviews that I discovered that this was even a major criticism in the first place. Before I proceed, I want to make my stance on this very clear. The normalization of pedophilia, which is unfortunately the establishment's most enduring goal, is the absolute worst trend in the entertainment industry. As the audience, it is morally necessary that we fight against said trend at every possible turn. Without exception, pedophiles deserve zero sympathy. Although I'd prefer not to discuss this issue in depth, it'd be intellectually dishonest to defend Ice Cream Man and ignore these accusations. In order to explain why it isn't a pedophilic film, it's imperative to compare Ice Cream Man with a movie that is pedophilic. Poor Things. Granted, I'm fully aware of what a controversial claim this is, as Poor Things is a universally beloved, multi-Oscar awarded film. But hear me out. Throughout the film, Ice Cream Man never explicitly sexualizes minors. With the exception of some sparse, unsavory dialogue, there isn't anything even inherently sexual about the movie at all. At its worst in this regard, as critics point out, there's shots of children's mouths being covered in ice cream and a scene in which the protagonist's older sister uses her toothbrush to make herself vomit. So, although the critic's perspective is understandable as this material is in the film, said material never feels sexualized. Rather, it feels appropriately gross. Gross in the way that all decent splatter movies should strive to be. Vomiting, as it's presented in the film, is employed simply as a vehicle for body horror, as everyone considers it gross, so everyone will get a visceral reaction out of it. Similarly, ice cream is employed simply as a convenient narrative device, as it's something that's unanimously loved by children. That said, it's entirely possible, of course, that Eli Roth secretly harbors fetishes for vomit and ice cream. However, the available evidence for this charge, at least as provided by this film, is scant at best. On the other hand, Poor Things, a movie that people fucking love, in no uncertain terms is built around the sexualization of a minor. Look, I can hear the protests already, but just because the protagonist inhabits the body of an adult, that doesn't change the fact that she still has the mind of a child. The movie depicts its, again, unambiguously child-age protagonist across numerous scenes of her having hardcore sex. It's a completely inexplicable industry-wide self-report how Poor Things, despite being explicitly pedophilic like this, is showered in laurels. Yet, that very same crowd denounces Ice Cream Man for having the gall to depict children in a horror movie? This display of hypocrisy and moral degeneracy is a perfect example as to why the Hollywood establishment should never be trusted. In centering this story around children, Eli Roth fully expected that the establishment, who's attempted to end his career at every turn, would foment and circulate these pedophilic accusations. Roth, to his credit, beats them at their own game. He cleverly gets out ahead of it, playing into the villainous stereotype that he's going to be depicted as in the media. To accomplish this, he casts himself as the protagonist's father and, in the aforementioned unsavory dialogue, cracks a joke about being attracted to minors. This is a clear example of how Roth, by adhering to the spirit of grindhouse filmmaking, deprives the media the pleasure of name-calling and reputation smearing. Poking fun at himself like this accomplishes two goals. It announces that Ice Cream Man isn't meant to be taken seriously, and it serves as a rebellious refusal to be censored by the media. More than anything, the acknowledged uncomfortability at the heart of Ice Cream Man is what makes it such an effective rallying cry. And an era in which horror filmmakers are desperately cloying for mainstream approval and a 3-picture directing deal, Eli Roth's film daringly acts as an insubordinate anomaly. He didn't make this movie to please the critics, and he didn't let them stop him from making exactly the brash, alienating, and upsetting movie that he wanted to make. By heroically forgoing the distant possibility of establishment approval, he allows the fans to enjoy Ice Cream Man for exactly what it is: pure, unadulterated exploitation trash.
For years, people said, you can't do this movie. This is too messed up. Like, this is too sick, which I always take as a good sign.
So yes, Ice Cream Man is tasteless. Yes, it uses AI. Yes, it makes people uncomfortable. Good. We need more movies like Ice Cream Man. Because I'd rather watch a real filmmaker make trash exactly the way he wants to than see some desperate hack make something exactly how he was told to.